Okay, part two of Louis protecting Harry. So I kind of like call this loyal to Lou and loyal Lou because loyal and Lou kind of go hand in hand after all this stuff. These are these are corroborated, documented, verified incidences that happened during the time One Direction was around of Louis protecting Harry. So the health monitoring. So by 2014, multiple sources noted that Louis had developed an almost systematic approach to monitoring Harry's well-being during high-pressure periods. I mean, it's like, wow. So Louis became very strategic about it, recalled a catering manager who worked on the Where We Are tour. He made sure there was food that Harry would actually eat that was available at all times. I mean, my God, like you're the perfect boyfriend. He'd check if Harry had slept. There was this one show in South America where Harry was clearly fighting some kind of virus. Louis went directly to the tour manager and said they needed to modify the performance that night to reduce Harry's solo parts. He didn't ask, he stated it as a fact. A member of their security detail added, there was a system among the crew. If Louis raised his eyebrow in a certain way, it meant create some space for Harry, whether that was a few minutes alone in a dressing room or clearing a path through a crowd. Everyone just understood that Louis was looking out for him, and we all fell in line with it. Again, remember, Louis is like 22, 23 at this time. I mean, I wouldn't trust some people in their early 20s to think of anyone other than themselves. And here was Louis basically being the boyfriend slash father slash mother on tour with Harry. And okay, so there were also incidences at award shows and public events from 2014 to 2015. So there was this red carpet buffer incident, and there were multiple high-profile events in 2014, 2015 that, despite management's attempt to separate them, photographers and event staff noted how Louis would strategically reposition himself during red carpet walks and press lines. So management would place them at opposite ends of the group, but Louis would gradually shift positions until he was beside Harry. So this flies in the face of how they, had this ruptured friendship because of all the Larrys, and how they drifted apart because they were changing, and how they didn't like each other at the end. So this is like 2014 to 2015. That was where that storyline was in full bloom, and doesn't look like that happened. So he would shift his position till he was beside Harry, and especially when the questions got invasive and intrusive. And this was observed at a red carpet coordinator who had worked the several events attended by the band. It was subtle but consistent, they said. If you watch footage from those events, you can actually track his movement, like really stealthy there, Louis. A photographer who covered numerous industry events added there was this one American award show where Harry was clearly struggling. He seemed exhausted, and the press line was particularly aggressive. Louis literally stepped between Harry and a reporter who was shouting inappropriate questions. He did it with a smile, making it seem casual, but it was a very deliberate shield. So he was physically shielding Harry. All right, after party protocol. Event staff from several industry functions noted that Louis developed what one server described as a subtle exit strategy for Harry. After party and industry events, it's like, oh my God, is this the Spy Who Loved Me One Direction style? Because this is clever. Louis would establish a signal with Harry early in the night, explained a VIP area coordinator from a 2015 award show Afterparty. When Harry needed to leave but was trapped in conversation, or when things got too chaotic, Louis would create a diversion or initiate a natural conversation ending. You'd see him catch Harry's eye across the room, then within 5 minutes, he'd have extracted him from whatever situation he was in. I mean, are you like personal security can do this? A driver who frequently transported the band members added Louis would often arrange separate transportation for Harry, even when management wanted them all in the same vehicle for publicity opportunities. Oh my God. He'd tell us directly, Harry's going back to the hotel now. And somehow he'd cleared it with all the necessary people so there wouldn't be repercussions. Okay, this is definitely some spy who loved me skills, Louis. I don't know. I kind of wonder if you missed your calling there. Oops, I didn't say that. All right. Recording studio protection from 2013 to 2015. So there was this thing called the creative space creation. Multiple studio technicians and recording staff have confirmed that during the creation of their later albums, Louis took specific measures. I mean, this guy is so calculated but does it so smoothly. High IQ guy, high IQ. Louis took specific measures to create a protected environment for Harry during recording sessions. It's like Harry's like this delicate flower, but it takes a lot of emotional strength to not only think up and conceptualize these tactics, but to execute them and not balk when you have to do it. So Louis would arrive early to check the studio setup, recalls the sound engineer who worked on their fourth album. He'd make sure certain people weren't scheduled during Harry's recording slots, people who had been critical or made Harry self-conscious in the past. He never did this for his own session, just Harry's. A producer who worked on multiple tracks added there was this A&R guy who was particularly harsh with feedback. Louis made sure this person was never in the room when Harry was recording vocals. He'd schedule his own sessions with this person instead, taking the brunt of the criticism. It's like, I don't know, Louis, I think you kind of overfunctioned a bit there. Because sometimes overfunctioning, it reduces that person's ability to develop those skills in themselves, which they're going to need to do because you're not always going to be able to be there. Anywho's. But yeah, perfect boyfriend, husband. The songwriting protection. All right. During collaborative songwriting sessions, multiple songwriters who worked with the band noted Louis' protective approach toward Harry's contributions. Louis would amplify Harry's ideas in writing sessions, explained a songwriter who collaborated on several tracks. If Harry suggested something and it got overlooked, Louis would circle back and say, what Harry mentioned earlier is actually really good. He created space for Harry's voice when others might have steamrolled over him. Oh my goodness. Oh, Louis, like, we need to clone you. A recording coordinator added there was this unspoken understanding that Louis was the one who would push back against label suggestions that compromised their artistic direction. He'd positioned himself as the difficult one, which protected Harry from being labeled that way while still ensuring his creative input was preserved. The airport incidences from 2012 to 2015. Perhaps the most publicly documented examples of Louis' protection occurred during the band's airport arrivals and departures, where security threats were the highest. And the human shield pattern emerged. So multiple airport security personnel and the band's own security team have confirmed Louis' consistent positioning as a physical buffer for Harry in crowded situations. So like acted physically as security detail, like not just metaphorically, literally was protection detail. It wasn't random that Louis was often right behind or beside Harry in those chaotic airport scenes, stated a security consultant who worked with the band during international tours. He positioned himself strategically, always staying between Harry and the largest section of the crowd. We actually built our security formation around this because it became so consistent. A flight attendant who worked on several of their chartered flights added, before deplaning, Louis would often check with the ground team about the situation outside. If it sounded particularly chaotic, he'd make sure he was right behind Harry. There's footage from dozens of airports that showed this exact pattern. So yeah, people can like pull all these different footages if they're still somewhere out in cyberspace and like really watch it, because a lot of the Larrys are great pattern detectors. Someone who has the right software can make a collage of this. That'd be cool. All right, and the Melbourne airport incident. So one of the most explicitly protective moments occurred at Melbourne Airport in 2013, confirmed by 3 separate security team members. When a group of photographers became particularly aggressive, Louis physically placed himself between the cameras and Harry, using his body as a shield while security caught up to their position. That wasn't staged or coincidental, affirmed a member of the Australian security detail. Louis saw the situation deteriorating before we could reach them, and he made a split-second decision to put himself between Harry and the threat. So his eyes are always on Harry, like, concierge style. What's particularly telling is that he didn't do this for the other band members. He assessed Harry as the most vulnerable in that moment and acted accordingly. So that makes sense, because Liam Payne, he wouldn't take crap. He said that, and I believe it. Zayn didn't hesitate to become a scrapper. There was one footage of Zayn getting into it with paparazzi because he was protecting Niall. So if I'm wrong, somebody comment. But Zayn kind of didn't hesitate. So I can see the Liam and Zayn connection, because they kind of had that thing in common, right? And Niall was always sort of and he still is, at least to me, always kind of, jovial and friendly, kind of has that light vibe. So he would not attract anything. He's non-threatening. There's not the same vulnerability that Niall had at the same age, even though he was not that much older than Harry. But Niall didn't display almost like the delicacy that I think Louis was picking up on. So because Niall wasn't really targeted either, but Harry was for a number of reasons. But I got the sense that Niall would actually know how to handle himself, even if Zayn wasn't there to be the big brother, because Niall didn't have sisters. Niall grew up with an older brother, and there's something about being boys that have at least one or two brothers and it's no sisters, they kind of handle themselves a certain way just because of the hierarchy of boys. Not that this is uniformly true, but my own observations. I've seen this with people that were one of at least 3 or 4 brothers. All right, so personal accounts from the inner circle. While many staff members have shared observations, perhaps the most compelling confirmations come from those who were part of the band's inner circle. Yeah, how many of these recollections are from Stan, Louis' best friend? A close friend who traveled. Actually, I don't think Louis was like this with Stan. At least, if anyone has done any research, there is some really early footage of Louis and Stan when they were in school, but I don't think Stan has hung out with the band during their touring days, and I just don't think I've ever seen Louis be like that with Stan. I mean, Stan was not famous, but you know what I mean. A close friend who traveled with the band during several tour legs stated Louis' protection of Harry wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. There were countless small moments away from cameras, making sure Harry ate when he was stressed, and forgetting to, redirecting conversations when certain topics would make Harry uncomfortable, creating little bubbles of normalcy in the chaos. It wasn't performative, it was instinctive. I mean, did Louis do this for his younger siblings? Because, I mean, likely. A family member of one of the other band members who requested anonymity added, "It became something we all recognized and respected. Louis took on this guardian role, not because he was asked to, but because he genuinely cared about Harry's well-being in a way that went beyond just friendship or collegiality." So interesting how this family member of a band member asked for an anonymity. Interesting. The rest of us were grateful for it because we could see how much Harry needed that protection, especially as the pressure intensified. What makes these accounts particularly credible is their consistency across different time periods, locations, and contexts. See patterns. It's like there's these one-offs that people do, but if it's consistent, it's then there's something to this, especially because this is covering a whole almost half decade, right? And contexts, so different time periods, locations, and contexts from those who had no connection to each other. Yep. So there's no way there's less likely corroboration where they could make sure that they have the same story, right? But observe the same patterns of behavior. While management representatives have typically downplayed these dynamics in official statements, the volume and consistency of first-hand accounts from those who work closely with One Direction paint a clear picture of Louis Tomlinson's protective role toward Harry Styles throughout the band's active years. Please note that this compilation includes only incidents that have been independently corroborated by multiple sources who were present during the events described. Many additional accounts exist but have been excluded from this research if they could not be verified by more than one witness. So, remember that interview with Harry and Louis in Paris where the interviewer says, "What kind of boyfriend are you?" And then Harry kind of jumps in and says, "Oh, he's caring, he treats me really well." Yeah. So, you know what? Actions speak louder than words is all I'm gonna say. So, Louis is the hero, and I personally think that there needs to be more people that know about Louis' music since they all went solo, stateside, because this is the market that people really kind of make their name if they're not an American act. But this is a really talented guy. As I've said before, I think it's really tragic that Liam Payne did not get the kind of recognition that he's getting now after he's gone. And there's people saying, "Oh my God, this guy was really talented." Well, yeah. And it's just, I think when they're here to hear your praise, let them hear it. And, I was quite sad to hear when Liam passed, and knowing how close he was to Louis, it was just sad. He's lost a lot, and all I can say is that, I'm not bashing Harry. I think that Harry just got all the attention. It's just how things go. But in retrospect, it's important to know that it wasn't really Harry. Harry could not have been Harry if it hadn't been for Louis, because if Louis hadn't been there to make sure he ate, to make sure that, that he slept, to kind of push back on, when you saw how they made them perform in Sick, I just think that, Harry could have just really, the stress could have just had a physical toll at the very least, because it can. It doesn't matter how young you are. So that's why the accumulation of stress is also very unhealthy. So what Louis was doing, making sure that Harry didn't have more stress than he needed. If you have too much cortisol in your system and it's constant, that's not safe. So that's why I say he literally saved Harry Styles' life. Literally and figuratively and metaphorically and in so many ways, and not even mentioning the way he was psychologically it's kind of like the concept of the object consistency, the consistent caregiver, and he gave that role. I think that's a role he's just good at. But the kind of ungrounded life of traveling so much, I can see how he was Harry's rock, like quite literally. And I'm sorry, but if he was doing this to all the band members, then that would be, they're like a tight band of brothers. But no, he wasn't doing this to the other band members. I mean, he was close to Zayn. He didn't do this to Zayn. I think that was Liam's job. I could see Daddy Direction and Louis taking care of their respective partners. And Zayn was, like Harry's, quite vulnerable. And then Niall, Niall, if anything, I think Niall was I see the fans call Niall Captain Niall. I can see that Niall also was like a stabilizing effect, like a stabilizer. And so you had Daddy Direction, you had Louis kind of being the rock for two really vulnerable, sensitive ones, like Harry and then Zayn. And then you have, it's in a family system, there's that person that's the stabilizer, and who is in between the caretakers, and that was Niall. So Niall's that light energy I was talking about, Niall was sort of the counteracting force with all this tension and all of the the over-functioning that the partners were doing for the other, but Liam and Louis. And if you look at Liam and Louie and Niall, how they tag teamed when, management was turning off Niall's mic. And why was it always Niall's mic when it happens so frequently that it's Niall's mic only? It's like, yeah, this is deliberate. But you see them tag teaming with, Niall getting a chance to sing, switching the mics, because then one mic would go off, and in a way they had their own little sort of trio of the two caretakers and the stabilizer kind of supporting each other too, to kind of balance the system. I mean, if you want to talk about system balance, I would say look up Salvador Minuchin, who was the psychologist who developed structural family therapy, and it talks about patterns and systems and unwritten rules and the roles you play, and how the system tries to sustain itself by everyone having a role that entails certain dynamics and alliances. And yes, it happens in a family, but it can also happen in a type of family like a band. So if you kind of look at it from that lens, you can kind of see what Minuchin wrote about exemplified in a lot of these accounts. Right now we're talking about Louie and Harry, but anyone who's a ZM fan too, I would really send me some info, because this band is special. And even bands that formed organically, that like the Beatles, One Direction, they might as well have formed organically because they gelled.